And we are recording. All right. So, as I said, I've got to back into 1 o'clock, so I got to get moving here. Okay. So everybody, welcome back to the final event of our 2022 PMI Champlain Valley Virtual Symposium Series. I'm Brian Williams, VP of Programs for PMICV, and I'll be your moderator for today's panel discussion. Before we get started, I'd like to review some chapter announcements. And also, before I introduce today's panel, I'd like to thank our chapter sponsors one more time. And this is going to be tricky. I'm going to share. I'm only on one screen today. Screen share. Our sponsors. I'll share that. Okay, there we go. Who are Decide Management Consulting and the University of Vermont Professional and Continuing Education for their support of our chapter to make this symposium possible. Decide will be offering their next PMP bootcamp, May 18th to 20th, and more information can be found on the PMICV.org website. Close that down. Cancel that. I won't do that. All right. Sorry, bear with me. PMICV will be hosting our final virtual event of the spring on Wednesday, May 11th at 6:30 p.m. Our speaker will be Julie Kowalski from the Spitzer-Rankle Group. She'll be speaking about problem solving using critical thinking skills. In our ever-changing world, innovative problem solving is of high value, yet very few people know how to use critical thinking skills to make better decisions and solve problems more creatively, accurately, and expediently. In this session, we'll learn the steps to engage in critical thinking, as well as the 9 intellectual standards, and walk away with a critical thinking cheat sheet to be able to refer to going forward and solve problems using critical thinking skills. Registration is now available and open on the PMICV.org website. And once again, that's going to be Wednesday evening, May 11th at 6:30 p.m. Finally, some housekeeping. Next slide. Please use the chat well. Today, it's going to be raise your hand if you have questions. We'll see how it goes. You can chime in as well into the discussion. This is going to be a general panel discussion. So now on to the panel. And we have on our panel here, I've got them up on the 6 box on my screen, but you'll see them randomly around the room here. Our panel participants and our presenters, Mallory, Molood Ceccarelli, Michael De La Maza, Michael Neer, Rebecca Medina, and Rebecca's special guest, Laura Burford, to help on some of the gig economy, talent economy, what the future looks like kind of discussion. So with that, I will kick off. And I have 4 questions that were supplied by the participants, and I've created a 5th today. And I also have some general themes, but if people in the crowd have their own questions, we can throw those out as well. But I will go with a few of the prepared ones first, since people were gracious enough to send the prepared questions. So we'll start with that. So first question for the panel, and specifically this is targeted first at Molood, but again, the panel can join in. We're looking for a cross section of comments. But so this is directed first at Molood. In your presentation, you made a clear distinction between remote work and working from home. I've been working remote for 20 plus years, but it's been tacitly understood that meant from home. I'm curious to know if, in your experience, businesses in general are aware of the concept of remote, like here, as separate and distinct from home. Secondarily, how does one message the difference up the food chain to ensure clarity of expectation? And grab the microphone.
All right. So let's start by reminding people who were at my session and those of you who weren't there that you're going to hear this for the first time. So I didn't necessarily make a distinction between work from home and working remotely, but I do emphasize that, or I did emphasize in the presentation, that the global experience of working remotely in the pandemic was working from home, where usually people have really good internet, if they're in an advanced country at least, whereas working remotely is a lot broader. I also mentioned that working from home limits our abilities. It forces us to work from a specific location. Some people live with their families. Some people have to take care of their kids and integrate their family life and work life all at the same time without any prior planning or strategy behind that. While remote work has existed before the pandemic, right? And remote work has been always about the ability, the freedom to work from anywhere people are most productive. That can be home, but when it is deliberate, people actually design their home to be a better work environment for them, which happened a few months into the pandemic. A lot of people went and bought an ergonomic chair, a desk that they could, raise to stand and sit down, but it wasn't coming from the employer. So with that said, when I make the distinction between the two, all I'm trying to do is to create awareness that in order to have policies and operations in our businesses to be able to work from anywhere, we need to create deliberate strategies and operations for that. For example, people need to be able to do their job from a different network. If you're requiring them to always VPN into our network, if they're working from a location with a low bandwidth, that's going to be an issue. How can we solve this problem? I want to create that conversation in the organization. And I also talked a lot about DEI and what that means when you're designing remote first policies. So all this says basically is the expectation is to empower every individual to be able to contribute to their work in a meaningful way from anywhere they are. And that means office as well as home, as well as anywhere else in the world.
So other comments from the panel?
Can I jump in and add something to that, or you can?
Please. Yeah, that's it. I'm sorry, that's my expectation, yes. Please jump in, yeah.
Okay. And you can add to this. But because I work with people who have decided to become the independent worker, many of them are working remotely, and it is many times at home where they have created their own office. But since the pandemic, one of the challenges that the independent worker has had to learn how to deal with is how to present remotely. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, please.
Online presentation on itself can be taught in a few weeks, if not months or years, right? Online presentation has little tips and tricks as well as fundamental ways of thinking. You see I'm standing, you see I'm looking right in the camera when I'm talking to you. You see I use my hands like close to my face. These are our techniques that I have learned. I would normally, if it were in person, my hands would be down. I wouldn't move them as much, and you wouldn't see so much facial expression on me. So these are learned tactics, and I also teach them in an online presentation course. So practice, but also actually emphasize on investing in teaching people and sending them out and encouraging them to learn. There are a million different YouTube videos that people can actually learn these tips and tricks for how to present online. Now that's like the person, right? But there is also the part of the presentation that's visual aids. Unfortunately, this is a legacy from our office life. We assume that presentation means a PowerPoint slide deck. And that is so far from the truth. So we call that slide deck a presentation, but a presentation actually is the delivery of the message, right? And that slide deck is literally visual aids. So how can we teach people to learn how to use this aid to convey their message in a more powerful way? That again is a whole school of thoughts. I'm pretty sure that you guys who are close to university, you have access to this knowledge because there are many amazing teachers who use visual aids in a beautiful way to convey really complex information. So I am a proponent of combining different worlds that don't necessarily have anything to do together. I learned online presentation from an improv theater teacher. Improv theater was never online, right? But that's where I started my journey, and I've come a long way. So I've taken a lot of courses from many different leaders, and this is Like, this is what I bring into the online presentation course when I'm talking to people. But then again, it's all about learning. Go after the knowledge and learn it.
That's interesting, your comment on improv. I know Cooper Smith, who some people probably know on this call, everybody knows Cooper. He's trying to get to know her, but he started out in improv as well. So that's an interesting concept there.
Thank you, because that is something I watch people who are working remotely really struggle with.
Yeah, it's uncomfortable.
It is.
But in 2015, I recorded the very first video for my very first conference. I was so awkward on camera. I was the interviewer, and the interviewee was trying to put me at ease. This is like how uncomfortable I was. I didn't know how to be myself. I had like too much makeup on, and I was trying to look perfect. But slowly, after like doing it over and over and over, it became so natural. Now I can even record a video on camera without anyone being there in real time. Now you are there, you can really give me feedback in real time, but even if you weren't there, I would speak the exact same way. It is all practice.
Comments from others on the panel?
I'm not on the panel, but I was just gonna say, I think the hardest thing is to learn to look at the camera and not at the other people on the screen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And to divert your eyes to where the camera is and not to look at other people when they're talking.
That's true. It's possible to design the setup so that your screen is very close to the camera. Right now, I'm using my iPhone as a camera. So my iPhone is right here and the screen is right behind it. So sometimes you see me look here because the screen is quite big. So when I'm looking here, I'm looking at Sue. And when I'm looking here, I'm looking at the camera, but I still see the people behind me. That's when I'm presenting. When I'm working, however, it's a little different. So usually my screen is here while the camera is here.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I do with the two screens. Go ahead.
I also disable my image on the screen, so I'm not distracted by what I'm doing and looking at myself, which is also helpful.
And there are some tools out there that you can use. Like I use something called Plexicam, which means my camera now is right smack in the middle of my screen. So I can look right at the screen and see everybody at the same time.
There you go.
Versus it being at the top and having to focus on the top.
Yes.
Well, I think too, I think it would be interesting to do a little bit of a study with younger generation, because younger generations that are used to doing selfies and actually looking directly at the camera and not at their image on the screen do much better with this. And I also think one of the other factors that I've found in presentations is also the ability or the appropriateness of the attendees to be also on screen, right? So this idea that in certain cases, and in certain internet situations and bandwidth situations, people will often turn off or not use video because it totally disrupts, their capability of actually even receiving the presentation and receiving the feed, if you will. But I also think there's a lot of people that just don't want to be on camera for whatever reason in that particular day. And so I appreciate your point about getting comfortable with talking when there's nobody there. I mean, that's just like get comfortable with basically talking to yourself and not feeling like you're crazy doing it. Because if you can get comfortable with that, then, it really won't matter what's happening with the individuals on the screen as far as their video and their feedback is concerned.
Yeah, Michael Neer, I'd like your opinion on that, because part of our conversation after your presentation, you really like the format. So what did you like about the ability to better connect with people virtually using what we did in your presentation in space?
I appreciate the question. I will say that I'll prod here the members and be a bit facetious. In my humble opinion, when people don't turn on the video, are they working at all? And how much is work from home really work? But we can leave it at that. I think we want to create work together, assuming that our face-to-face is limited and it will probably be limited for a while. My 2 cents is, and I'm happy for people to respond, if you're not there with me, at least with your video, we're not doing any work. So some companies just pay people not doing work. I think the US has been really good about that 2 years ago. But once we do really have to go back to work, when I'm working with people and they don't turn on the video, they're not working with me, and we can't create great things together. That's my 2 cents.
I would disagree with you. I have software developers that are very introverted. They don't like to be on camera. I mean, let's recognize that part of this is also meeting people where they're at and being good at understanding the individuals, right? And so, yes, I agree with you. Absolutely, there are those people that are off camera that don't want to interact and don't want to engage. There's also the people that, as you guys were hinting earlier, are dealing with family members in the background, kids going crazy, doing the best they can. They haven't taken a shower today, and they do not want to be on camera. They are like, they look like crap, right? And so they don't want to be on camera, but they're actively engaged in a conversation with me. That doesn't mean they're not working with me just because I can't see their face. It makes it harder. You're absolutely right. It makes it more challenging, but that doesn't mean they're not working with me.
There's
And-
also
and
bandwidth
Amy, there's-
considerations
yes,
that need
I
to be
was-
brought into bear here too, because I've been on plenty of meetings where people just honestly say, I have to shut my camera off and put myself on mute because otherwise I won't hear what you're saying because of bandwidth.
Yeah, Amy brought that up before, and I think that is definitely a problem here in Vermont. And especially if you're the one that's sharing your screen, sometimes that can hog the bandwidth as well. So
I mean, I'm at home. My husband works from home. I have a teenager from home. When he turns on his video game, there will be no video, or people's weird stuff is happening. And if you feel that you have to see people to know whether they're working, perhaps you need some other methodology to assess the output. Like, people know what I do. I don't just look at people. I do stuff. You know what I mean? So it might be a good thing to figure out some other methodology.
All right, I think we need some empathy here. So I have a question for Alan instead of everybody pile on Michael Neer.
Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. Hey,
that was clear.
if you want a lively panel, you just keep asking me questions. Hey, I promise you, Brian, people will start getting their bubble pricked, and maybe we'll have real conversations.
This was good. This was really good. I just want to make sure we're picking on you, but I will go to Alan, whose presentation was about empathy. So Alan, the question is, I really appreciate your approach of integrating fundamental psychology and emotional considerations into PM work. I've seen a fair amount of this at the professional office level employee environments, but less so at the production floor environment. How have you experienced this approach being accepted and utilized in working with companies that have a large hands-on workforce?
So for those, those didn't see my program. I really focus on, in terms of the framework, the personality framework is the big 5 personality traits, which are openness to experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And I guess by definition, if you're talking about a production floor, conscientiousness is going to be what's most highly correlated with production. Conscientious individuals are able to, take clear instructions and follow through to completion. And it's why one of the reasons why conscientiousness is most highly correlated with success as a project manager as well. Things are thrown at us, but we need to be able to kind of follow through and still deliver the project. So you could say, well, on the production floor, if you don't need any new ideas, if you don't need any better ways of doing things, then you just want to fill the production floor with conscientious individuals that can just kind of work away at it and produce, right? Results. The problem is you can end up working very efficiently in the wrong direction. And that's where you don't want to have everyone be super high in conscientiousness. And that's where individuals that are higher in openness can bring in the creativity dimension. Now, depending on how it's set up, maybe you don't want that. By the time it gets to the production area, you just kind of want to, go full steam. And so that's maybe in like the design office, you'd want people that are more high in openness so they can bring in the creativity and more of an agile approach. That's the challenge when you're high in conscientiousness. You're often and low in openness, you're often not able to notice better ways of doing things. And so if your environment allows that in the production area, then then you'd want to have a mix. And I would say in most environments, you do want to have a mix of personality, so that the strengths of one individual can complement, make up for, I guess you could say, the weaknesses of another. So, I mean, the other traits would also play. I mean, in terms of extroversion, if you want to, that's the energy dimension. And so if you have extroverts, you kind of want to have that gregarious, social environment, because that's what extroverts thrive off of. But they can bring the energy in. And then if we look at agreeableness, we talked about how that's actually negatively associated with career success overall. But if you wanted to, and it's because agreeable people are find it difficult to say no. And so they kind of spread themselves thin and don't end up being really good at anything, because you're kind of, trying to get along with everyone and being pretty good at everything. So that's when it comes to the production, agreeable people are really good at cooperation. And so that would be a strength as well. So anyway, there's, I guess the answer is to it. It's good to have a mix. If you're really just looking at production, though, it's conscientiousness.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, it took me back to my days in the 90s when I was a operations supervisor at a plant. And yes, I really appreciated the people who were working for me who were conscientious, but I also focused on the person who would call a severe squeaky wheel, who just was not happy, wanted to see something different. Mm-hmm. So I went off with him and got a whole work stream going with him, because I knew that he had the energy and he wanted to do this. And he was also conscientious, by the way. But I had to sort of bring out the rest of it to say, you've got these different ideas and a different approach on how to do this, because otherwise, it's what you said, we're all going to do the same thing in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and that can be the challenge. You kind of have blinders on, and it all depends on the environment. Sometimes you don't want, if you just need to get things done, you almost, for at least a short period of time, you don't want people kind of trying out different, better ways.
Creativity on the production floor, and that isn't necessarily a good thing.
Yeah. So,
any other comments on that question? And Khalil, if you have any comments, because I know you were the one who sent that one
in. No additional comments. I think Alan's approach is great. It's good to hear.
Okay. All right, third question. I'm actually going to go, because I want to get Rebecca involved here. So this is the extra question. Where is it? Oh, here it is. Sorry. So this is for Rebecca and Laura. As the expectation is that the independent consultant opportunities will continue to increase, what do you see as the key upcoming challenges faced by both those who will fill these roles, as well as organizations looking to fill their needs? So I'll direct it first to Rebecca, who hasn't had a chance to talk yet.
Yes, thank you, Brian, and thank you everyone for the opportunity. This is a great question, and I will address it first from the organizational perspective. And I think the two fundamental ideas here are awareness, acceptance, and change. When an organization is thinking about a contingent workforce or working with consultants, or the ability to leverage an independent workforce, they must be aware that this workforce exists. And I see with larger enterprises, there's less of an awareness and acceptance. And without that awareness and acceptance, they're not able to put forth the operational processes that they need to onboard and engage with the contingent workforce. Now, this is not to say that all enterprises have this issue. Meta, for example, formerly Facebook, they have a specific program in place, their contingent workforce program, that is designed to recognize this workforce and also help with onboarding and working through bringing them on as productive parts of their workforce. But that's one example. There are more examples of organizations that do not have processes and policies in place to take advantage of independent consultants, independent contractors, which, by the way, now comprise 36% of our American workforce. So I think the biggest challenge for organizations is going to be that awareness, and then creating the processes to properly onboard and retain this type of talent. And I'll go ahead and pose the question to Laura. If you can speak to, Laura, some of the challenges for the independent consultant.
Yeah, I'm going to dovetail a little bit and add a little bit to what you said about organizations. What I have seen when it comes to organizations is a couple things. One, depending on where you live in the US, you are going to find different results when it comes to organizations. So you need to really take a step back as we've become much more remote and much more flexible as to where we work. As an independent worker, you have to take a step back and think about the company, the organization, and how open they are to the independent worker. And when I talk to organizations, one of the things I talk about is, and Rebecca, you mentioned Meta, who's really at the top of their game when it comes to this. What do you have in place so that people want to work with you? So it's not just the onboarding, but what are you doing to help keep the people engaged that you really like, so that they want to work with you? And it's simple things like one company, I said, you want to keep waiting 30 days to pay your independent worker. Is there any reason why you can't pay them in 15 days? And the comments, well, no, we've always paid for 30 days. I did a presentation right before the pandemic hit for a talent group, an HR talent group. And their comment to me is they never thought to educate their workers, and this dovetails Rebecca's comment, they never thought to educate their workers as to how to work with that independent worker. So it's kind of dovetail. But the other side of it is, when it comes to the independent worker, if you want to be an independent worker, you have to figure out how you are going to stand out. How you go about building a relationship with a company so that they think about you first. And I've watched many project managers struggle with this, in the fact that they say, well, we're project managers. I'm like, no, you have to put some words in front of project manager. But you also have to be able to articulate why you. And it's not the value proposition. This is, how are you going to help somebody? For example, I have somebody that's an Agile project manager, and he has taken PMI's Agile methodology and made it his own. So that when somebody says, I need help with Agile project management, he is able to clearly articulate how he's different than his competition, how he's going to help them eliminate the pain points and become the person that they think of first. So it's really taking a step back as an independent worker and thinking about how you become, and you might have heard this elsewhere, the independent worker of choice. So I just gave you a few ideas, but that's so it's both sides. From an organization perspective, how you come across so that people want to work with you and be part of your culture, and the other, as the independent worker, how do you go about becoming the one and building the relationships so that you are the one they think of?
I can add a couple of things to that, if that works. So I've been in, is that okay?
Yes, please.
So I've been an independent for 12 years, and I went through a change very similar to the one that Laura has described when it comes to payment. So when I started, I would get paid at any schedule that the company wanted to pay me at. And then over time, it became tighter, tighter, tighter. And what I do now is I get paid in advance.
And that's what you want to do as an independent worker. You want to get paid in advance.
Yep. And then the second thing is, what do I get paid for? So I started getting paid off by the hour. Then I started getting paid off by the day. And now I just charge a flat fee monthly retainer. So there's no time related to the work that I'm doing. So if I can do the work in a week, I do the work in a week. If it takes 2 weeks, it takes 2 weeks. But the benefit of that to me is that I'm actually leveraging my experience, all of the tools I've created in the past. So I get faster and faster.
Yeah, and that's a great point that you just mentioned. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Michael.
That's Michael did Maza. He was one of our presenters, sorry.
Michael, you're right. And that is one of the trends that came out, or one of the trends that came out during the pandemic, because the trends with regard to the independent worker really accelerated. But one of the trends is companies are saying, we don't want an hourly rate or a daily rate anymore. We want you to provide us one fixed price, whether it's fixed price or value-based pricing. I don't care which model you use. There's pros and cons of both. But they want to know, how much is it going to cost? And from an independent worker perspective, it's much better from a number of perspectives. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. And then I'll give just one final tip on that, which is, it's very valuable, as Laura and others have said, to see if you're actually considered to be part of the team, or if you're considered to be very separate from the rest of the team and not included in certain conversations. And so one simple test of that is, what is your email? So if the company gives you an email, then that means that you're probably a lot closer to the company than if they don't give you an email. So that's a very, very simple little test that I've used in the past. And I found that, like, companies that really care about creating teams, actually, as soon as you're in, they treat everyone in the same way. Those are my comments.
Yeah, and Michael, that's one thing they have to be, and I don't disagree with your comment, but I think you also need to be careful with that, because some companies will not do that, not because they don't want to make you part of the team, but because they have regulatory requirements that won't allow them to make you part of, give you that email address. So you want to think broadly and think about the company or the organization and what are their requirements, and then figure out how you can be part of it. But, you know, sometimes it's as simple as everybody having lunch together.
Right.
Or coffee.
Yeah.
Right, and I'll add to that dialogue. Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing. You're right. With experience as an independent professional, you're able to move from that hourly rate when you don't know quite how long you're going to have to invest in an initiative to complete it, right? You can move from there into that fixed fee because you've done it. It's, for instance, implementing Smartsheet into a business's processes. You've done it before, you have an idea of the level of effort, and you're able to quote out that fixed fee. And that really does come with experience. And as we're onboarding talent to our platform, we see a variety of individuals, some who are transitioning from a corporate role into independent consulting, and so they're leaning more toward that hourly rate for now. They're basically taking their annual salary and converting it to an hourly. And then we have others who are career consultants, and they lean more toward that fixed fee. So I think it is dependent on experience. And then the other idea that I'd like to talk a little bit about is what Laura mentioned in terms of worker classification. And organizations really are under pressure to ensure that they are properly classifying their workers, in particular independent contractors and consultants. If they're classifying them as 1099, there are certain tests that they have to ensure are met in order to have that 1099 classification. And misclassified workers, they come with great legal penalties and implications for the organization. So I do see a lot of sensitivity in this area, in particular in California and some of the states that have had quite a bit of legislature due to Uber and the misclassification of workers as contractors versus employees.
I'd like to add something to that very last thing you said about the legal issue. That is still a very big challenge in most of the governments around the world. And if you live in the US or Canada, you have your local governments to deal with as well. If you want to, like, if anybody is interested in seeing like what is being done at the government level, the government of Ireland has done an amazing job in changing the regulations for empowering people to work remotely. They've changed many, many rules, and the government of Portugal is next in line. Portugal is generally slower in making changes happen, but they're also quite advanced. And the third one that comes to mind is Malta. Malta also has made a lot of changes in the last couple of years in changing the regulation and how people are recognized, how people are categorized, how people get paid, and how their rights for remote workers to rent property or to buy property, to get access to internet and all that kind of thing. And there's also one other thing that came to my mind in an earlier part of this conversation. So we've talked about the organizational perspective and the workers' perspective. I think there's a middle layer that we shouldn't forget about. And that's probably the focus of PMI, training project managers who are mostly middle managers, right? I want to remind us that there's also skills that are required at the middle level in how we slice work. If we want to empower people to become independent workers, we also need to be able to give them chunks of work that they can do independently. If you want to create teams that necessarily have to work in real time at the same time, like Michael prefers, for example, with their cameras on and stuff, that's how we should slice the work and give it to a team of people to work on it together. But I think the skills for Agile product ownership, there is a skill for how to slice work, but I think we haven't really succeeded in the last 20 years to really hone down into the skill and teach people how to do this really, really well. And I think that's the next step for anyone at this middle level to upgrade their skills and to be able to better divide work into pieces that can be done based on the preference of the organization and the workers, as well as learn how to delegate it properly.
Yeah. And I agree with you, because one of the challenges I've had with the project triangle, or the triangle, when it comes to the independent workers, there are a number of things that are not addressed, which is what you're talking about, are not addressed for the independent worker. And I work with project managers, but I also work with people that are not project managers. Project managers have the skills to deliver.
Yep.
They do a great job of delivering, but they are missing some of those softer skills and leadership skills that are necessary for them to be really, truly successful as the independent worker.
Yeah, that's a good one, and I think you've teed it up nicely. I want to hear about, I have a hand up, but maybe go to that. Let me ask the question of Michael Dale Maza. I think it's teed up well for you on the question of the Agile product owner, given that you're the Agile or Agile expert in our symposium. So what sort of comments would you have towards that, building up the Agile project ownership and how we might go about that?
Yeah, so first I want to just respect that Sue had her hand way up for a long time.
Okay, so Sue, go ahead.
Yeah, so sorry, one of the things that I have had to deal with is in the past when I was working as an independent was the companies not wanting to put specifics in the contract. And wanting to keep it kind of at a higher level and having to push to get specifics in terms of what the scope and responsibilities would be. And I've even had situations where I started working completely understanding the scope to be one thing and then have been put on something entirely differently, which I would never have signed up to do. So I'm just curious. Yeah, so I'm just curious, like, have others had that situation? And besides the obvious of being very firm in terms of making sure that the contract has the specifics in it, is there anything else? Or, I mean, I think that goes along the lines of making sure that both the companies and the independents are educated in how to work together. But short of that, it's not an uncommon experience, and I think that it kind of doesn't set you up for success.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Mhm.
What was your billing model? Were you billing an hourly rate?
Yes.
Okay. And this ties to Michael's comment earlier. If you're billing an hourly rate, people have a tendency, and please use my word, listen to my words and use it with a grain of salt. People have a tendency to look at you as a pair of hands. And the tendency is there for things to shift a lot easier and a lot faster than if you go in with a fixed price, saying that this is the scope of the work that I am doing. This is what the assumptions are. Here's what's included. Here's what's not included. And you're charging them a fixed price or a fixed fee. And I don't care which pricing model you use, but that's what you're using as your basis. It's moving you kind of up that ladder or the consulting ladder to a higher level. You're starting to be looked at much more as that expert, and don't take this the wrong way, much more as that expert and not that pair of hands. So you want to kind of start, as an independent, you want to start shifting yourself and changing the relationship so that you're looked at slightly different. And you will find that your client will work with you to stay within the scope of that fixed price. Michael, since you went from the time, an hourly rate, daily rate to a fixed rate, or a fixed price, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, so that was exactly one of the problems that I was trying to solve for. So that happens all the time. And I remember one very specific contract where the goal was to mentor a couple of people. That was like one of the things that was in the contract. But the two people hadn't been hired yet. And they never hired the person. They never hired the two people. And fortunately, I was being paid in advance. So I didn't care, right? And so that's one of the reasons to go there, right? It's enormous peace of mind for me. The other peace of mind I had was at the end, I was always worried about the last check because it came after the engagement was over. Now I don't worry about the last check because the last check comes a month before I do the work. So I totally empathize with your situation, Sue. And that was my solution, get paid in advance.
I can share my perspective as well. So I have a similar story to yours, Michael, from years ago when I had just started. My very first client was my last employer. And then after that, I got a huge Canadian company as a client. And I had a contract very similar to what you described, Sue. I signed it and I was super excited. And then I went into the assignment and the work, the tasks were completely different from what I had understood in the beginning. The good thing is I caught it early, and this company had recently grown to be that large. They had been acquired. So it was kind of easy to access the CTO of that smaller company that had been acquired, and we changed the contract. But that story aside, over the past few years, like I think we started doing this when we hit 7 figures. That was when we decided to have service agreements in place. So now when we get the request to our company, we send the service agreements right away instead of waiting for the client to actually tell us what to do. However, one of the critical parts of putting stuff in the service agreement is that I personally go and talk to the client, talk to a decision maker who will eventually potentially be the signatory person on the contract. And I ask them a lot of questions about what they expect and what the problem is that they want to solve. And the key question I ask is, what does success look like? So for everything they say, I say, what does success look like in that particular thing? And we put that in the service agreement. And because it comes from us, well, I say that because it comes from us, it's fair, because I always have to argue with my lawyer to make things fair and not one-sided. But yeah, that's our solution, to initiate the agreement sending as well as asking the questions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for all the info. I should have prefaced this was pre-pandemic, so it was a little different world that we were working in. And I feel like at the time it was the employers that were driving what their needs were versus, us just going there and saying, I can provide this value to you, and it was a different kind of an engagement model, I think. But I appreciate all the good answers.
So you're
Sue,
talking about sales and branding, right? Sales is you going and selling your services. Branding is you have a brand and people come to you
Right.
for solving their problems. But you get there. Like, I think that the explanations we got from Laura was so beautiful, that there is a level building on how you become that consultant that you want to be.
and
That's a good
Sue,
way to
I'll
put it.
offer up some experience that I've had, especially with a new customer who they're not familiar with your services. You might quite often have to start out at an hourly rate to show your value and prove it out. In that space or during that time period, trying to be as definitive as possible in what it is you're going to do and what the outcome is going to be is extremely important, because when these new items come up, or what we would call scope creep comes up, you can then have that conversation with the customer by saying, you might have to give something else up in order to do this other work you want me to work on, because it's going to either elongate the timeline for me to do this work, or it might not happen as a result of some of this other work you've got coming in. So being as descriptive as possible in the engagement in the contract is extremely helpful and gives you the ability to fall back on that if you need to.
Yeah, and the scenario that I had, it wasn't even scope creep. It was a complete replacement scope, and it wasn't anything that at the time when I was looking at different opportunities, it wasn't an opportunity that I wouldn't have jumped on it if it was
Kind of a bait and switch, huh?
Yeah, it was a bit of a bait and switch. Yes,
Yeah.
It's a good way to put it.
The other thing you can always do when you're in that situation is say, hey, look, this is not what we agreed to, and you walk away.
That's exactly what I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I have done that with a government kind of contract.
Yeah, I mean, I got it set up and running for them, and then I said, this was not the work that we agreed to, and this is not where I get my energy from. So, I'll hand it off to somebody.
And sometimes you have to do that.
Oh,
Rebecca,
yeah.
are you trying to say something? I'm kind of.
No, yes, I was going to add, as part of my presentation, I distinguished between an independent contractor and an independent consultant. And the differences are that the contractor works more at the tactical level. They are working directly with the project team on a very specific project, for instance, launching a new website for a company. Whereas the independent consultant, they function more at the strategic level. They're working closely with the executive team, for example, to define the strategy and tactics for a new PMO implementation. So they're more of an advisor. They're hired to solve a problem. And I think that's what we're talking about here, right? As project professionals, our tendency sometimes, in particular, if you're new to consulting, is to focus on that tactical role, that more hourly role. But as you glean more information and experience and lessons learned, because we all do, you can move and guide into that more strategic role where you are the go-to person for a very specific problem that corporations have. So we always recommend to our talent that you focus on moving away from that tactical into the strategic, and that's where the fixed fee pricing comes in, because you have proven expertise in this area. And finally, I'll add, we've also spoken to professionals who have started work without a signed contract. Why, how, it has happened. And so definitely, if you do not have a template, there's tons of templates out there. You do need to sign a contract, a statement of work, a service agreement. And within that service agreement, detail exactly, no different than a project plan, what is in scope, what is out of scope so that there's a conversation there and you're setting the right expectation before you ever begin work. Very important.
Yeah. And dovetailing what Rebecca said, if you go to my website, there's a free proposal template that you can help yourself to.
Okay.
That includes what you should have in a proposal. Just help yourself to it. It's a freebie.
Okay. So changing direction and getting the man who turned his camera off back on here. It's more of a theme than a question, but socialization in a remote environment. So being in the context of we're working in a remote environment, whether it be through independent contracting or whatever, but socializing in that environment, and talk a little bit about the liberating structures that you find most effective, Michael, in that kind of environment.
So I think the same way that we had in our session, any time you can build on the teams or group of people's innovation and creativity, and my preference for that is an unconference using Zoom or unconference using any such tool. And we went through a conversation cafe as an example where through a workshop approach, you elicit the topics you want to talk about with the team. Could be strategy, planning, and you create the teams based on the feedback that you got from the first step. And then you create short sessions where people opt for the topics you want to talk about, where you have people who volunteer to capture comments and ideas, and then debrief, and then keep on refining that. So that was a conversation cafe we went through. My favorite is where I don't come with prior knowledge about what it is that the output's going to be. I know the outcome we want to have, and I let the organization or those team of people, and it could be 30, 50, or 10 or 6, identify the most important topics, discuss the most important topics, and create a set of activities that are outcome driven out of those interactions. So unconferences, or we call these conversation cafes or lean coffees.
Okay. So that's your go-to to get the engagement in a virtual type.
For sure. It's a string, actually, a string of 4 or 5 structures, starting with a impromptu networking, then letting a team create that wicked question, identify the wicked question, then do breakouts. We experienced 1, 2, 4 all, and then for the crux, for the essence of the interaction, using a lean coffee, a conversation coffee, where an opt-in for the conversation. Then we come up with the main topics. We can either use a TRIZ approach to work through the issues, or a 15% solution. And we top it all off with a quick impromptu networking at the end to solidify the commitment. So it's not just one. It's a probably string of 5, 6 interactions that will last between 2 to 4 hours. Works very well for strategizing. Works very well for the team to own their destiny. So that's my preferred string of interactions or liberating structures to create true outcomes.
And let me direct it then to Alan. In terms of, like, we talked about personality profiles. How could you build upon that with your knowledge and what you've done with the personality profiles, and knowing that there's these different groups, and how to identify the different types of people that you have involved in these type of sessions, especially when it's an internal or if you're an independent consultant?
Get my microphone on. Well, it's more difficult in a virtual environment, that's for sure. But you start to notice kind of the nuances and the characteristics in people, and that's really where I would say the practical benefit comes from, in understanding personality. So there has to be a particular. What was the question? Was, basically in a virtual environment, how can you?
How to take advantage of? It's one of the things you were stressing was the knowledge of who you're working with. You talked something about Myers-Briggs or different, like introvert, extrovert.
Yeah.
How could you sort of use that kind of information to sort of help better utilize some of the things that Michael's talking about? Because Michael, he's out there, he's up front, he's going to jump in and do it, but there's going to be a lot of people who just aren't going to, and we saw some of that even in the presentation, just aren't going to be as engaged. So how would you use some of that knowledge you talked about to improve engagement?
Well, in many ways, you don't want to, like, let's say you had a bunch of introverts that, you know, don't want to be front and center. You'll actually, if you're kind of forcing participation, you're just going to make them very uncomfortable. And so and you can actually get to push them to the point where they will just want to leave the conversation or leave the organization if they're having to do that all the time. And so I would say, if you want to, let's say you want an introvert to become more extroverted, it kind of has to be a personal choice on their own and that's where I was. I'm naturally an introvert, and I've worked, you know, for a lot of years on becoming more extroverted. It isn't that extroversion is better. It's just in the trajectory I kind of chosen and vocation I chose in life, there were advantages around being more extroverted. And so I was able to make a lot of those changes, but kind of being forced to won't really have much benefit. So that's just getting to know your team members. And so you understand what they're comfortable with and what they aren't, and make sure if you're going to push them out of their comfort zone, that it's their own choice if you want there to be any benefit in it.
Because I'm thinking there's one that I really like that Michael Neer presented, was Chatterfall, which is really, it's just everybody just basically type something into the text, don't hit enter. To me, that seemed like a perfect introversion thing. It was like, I'm just one of many. I'm not standing out in the crowd. So I really like that part of that particular technique that Michael had presented, because that's what I'm trying to get at, is some techniques seem to be directed towards different personality traits and trying to identify which of these are the best to use at each time, especially in a virtual. It's easier when you get the visual cues when you're in person, but when you're online, it's a lot tougher. Are they not participating because the dog's barking, the kids are running around or eating breakfast, or are you truly dealing with an introvert who just, it's going to take something different to get their engagement?
No, exactly. And that's where something like Chatterfall, you're right. You're not putting yourself out there in kind of the center of attention, but you're still involved and participating. And all of us want to feel like our thoughts and ideas are being considered. And so that's where some of those things are super important. Now, I think you do have to bring it back to, well, what's the goal of this to begin with? So if it's like a team building thing and make people feel comfortable, or is there really an outcome you want from it? And so then that's where some of these could be more practical than others as well. So it depends on the end goal.
Yeah, because I think of it like a toolkit. Because PMI has toolkit. I'm also a member of IIBA. They have toolkits. It's like, hey, you pull out different tools for different things. And I see the analogy there, that you're talking about personality traits. There's a toolkit just for personality traits.
Yeah, and then all of this, like whatever you choose, it's good to have some sort of feedback mechanism in place to know whether we're just kind of spinning the wheels or it's actually working. And it's not always that easy to determine whether it's working, because there's so many other factors at play. You know, people just naturally working together over time are going to build relationships and so on. So,
I'd like to bring up two topics here related to this. One is, I think it is false to assume that socializing is an event that we do in person or virtually in real time every once in a while. I think socialization, as naturally it comes to human beings, is an ongoing process, especially for a team that works together every day. So I think it is the job of the manager, the team lead, or the person who is in that position in the team to continuously create this. A really easy way to create continuous engagement is to create a culture of being okay with making mistakes or having fun together or saying good morning to each other every day that you turn on your chat tool or whatever. But also to sometimes, like, I have encouraged people to have separate chat rooms where they can talk about different interests. Like, some people are interested in photography. They share beautiful photos that they've taken of their pets or nature. Some people are really into, I don't know, anime, and they share about that. But having like these communities that are intentionally created, that create the opportunity for ongoing and sporadic conversations, that's very important.
Yeah, we're actually doing that in our company. We started those affinity groups, is what we call them. So it doesn't necessarily have to be related to like a gender or something. It can be just a general commonality. So I like that approach, and our company's using it, and we're just getting started in the first year of it, but I think we've had positive feedback with that for just those general affinities.
That is a great opportunity to bring the new generation into our work environments, because there are many people who have literally grown up with social media and they call themselves digital community manager or digital office manager, and their job is to create engagements virtually. They are so good at this that even I, as a millennial, could never become as good as they are in doing this in writing in a community. So I think this is a great opportunity to bring these people into our work environments.
I think it's also important, though, that you kind of find the balance, because you'll actually, people that are high in conscientiousness, they'll kind of get annoyed by too much of the touchy-feely. Like if you're always doing affinity groups and stuff, it's like, okay, let's just get on to actually getting the work done. And I'm pretty high in conscientiousness, and so I've actually felt that as well. If it's like overkill on the I don't know if touchy-feely is the right word, but the it's a distraction from especially if you really are in a time crunch. It can be it can seem like a distraction. There are benefits, but you have to know the balance.
Yeah, there should be absolutely no expectation that relates to performance or pay on that. This should literally be for socializing. Just for you want to distract yourself from work, you go to this channel and you talk with your colleagues. That's it. But if we associate it with outcome or expectation, then we're already lost.
It seems like a natural segue into agile mindset, because that's really that's what I wrote down, and it just seems to fit very nicely with that. Is that we don't necessarily have the answers. We don't have the book with here's the 10 things I can try, but I'm going to have to figure out as I go along, hey, what works, what doesn't work, and it's okay. Then reset, reiterate, come back around and try it again. So I got my agile guy here again, Michael. Any comments on that?
Yes. So I think the very first top level thing is to just draw a distinction here. And my goal in life is to be as controversial and as outspoken as Michael Neer. So I'll take a shot at that. The way that Agile was initially phrased was that it was completely and totally inconsistent with project management. So I just want to get that out there, and that the focus of, say, scope, schedule, and budget, or the focus of top-down process control was completely and totally inconsistent with Agile. So I just want to be really super open about that, about the history of Agile versus the history of project management. And so everything really falls out from one's interest and ability to navigate that distinction, and whether to view Agile as a fundamental culture change, which means that it would include executives and leaders, or a change in practices, which might include just a part of the organization, and certainly doesn't need to include the C-level. And so depending on what choice one makes in that, the answer to that question is either super hard or it's really pretty straightforward. It's learning a set of practices and applying them. That's the easy part. Learning the hard part, that's something that really has not been seen in a large organization as far as I know. And so the situation becomes just a radically different situation.
So as you said in your talk, smaller chunks, the smaller the better, right?
Yeah, so because what you're doing is that you're testing the reality of the organization, right? So everyone at the start will say, oh yeah, we buy into culture change and values. And then you do really anything and you discover that the answer is no, in my experience, 97.56% of the time. And then you have a choice there of whether to drop back into practices or to do something else.
And I'll add that as project professionals, we are uniquely positioned and astute at people management. working with people, working at all levels of an organization, whether it's facilitating a project team meeting or giving an executive status report to your C-suite. We as project professionals are leaders, not always with the authority over our resources, but we are leaders. And that's where that empathy really comes into play. And as I have observed various project managers, those who are extremely successful and others who struggle, the real difference is in their ability to engage with people, to read people, to create a safe project team space, to ensure that it's inclusive. Within our current workforce, there are 5 generations of workers working together for the first time. And so Gen Z is working with your traditionalists, right? Your baby boomers. And so I think creating that safe and inclusive workplace is even more important now. And we as PMs, because we are the voice of the project, we are that leader, that guide, we can really contribute to creating a safe space for all team members. And it's an exciting time, but it also comes with practice. And I've seen that PMs who do not excel in this area struggle, especially when you're moving into an independent career.
Excellent point.
And dovetailing what you just said, Rebecca, about moving into that independent career, it's great to be able to build that inclusive team and have a team that works well together. But one of the challenges I've seen with people who are project managers moving out and going out on their own is they do a great job working with that team, but they struggle when it comes to building the relationship with that stakeholder, that economic buyer, the decision maker, where you have to learn, and this is something you have to learn. And I found introverts are better at this than extroverts, believe it or not. You have to learn how to build that relationship with that management team that's more than just the team you're working with on a day-to-day basis. And that takes time, and that's energy, and it's really taking the time to learn how to properly communicate with that person, because every stakeholder is different. But once you really start dealing with the C-suite people, it can be even more challenging. How's that?
Yes, Laura, I agree. And I suspect that the reason why introverts are better at doing this is because they listen more. Extroverts tend to want to be heard. They want to be the first person to start a conversation. They want to be the last word, right? And so it's a very different personality. Whereas an extrovert, they are listening more. And I advise, even with project managers, it's great to be communicative. It's wonderful that you feel comfortable enough to speak first and such. Those are important. But at the same time, it's important that we listen first, in particular when you are dealing with clients and stakeholders. Your job is to ensure that you're delivering value for them based on their expectations. And the only way that you can do that is by listening to them and understanding what it is that they value and what their expectations are.
Now, I heard the word correlation. I thought of you, Alan. I mean, you were correlating certain things. So what's your comment on that correlation of introverts and being better able to deal with C-suite, being better listeners overall?
Well, I think there's definitely some truth in it. Extroverts, tend to, tend not to listen. And actually, I think, I'm trying to think, would this not apply to introverts? I think that's almost a human characteristic, in that unless we're good at active listening, we listen just long enough to formulate our own response, and then we wish the other person would just keep quiet so we can share our own response. Now, that's probably more extroverts are probably more prone to that, and I would say I think I've gotten better, but there were certainly lots of times I can think of in the past where that's exactly where I've been. Once I've formulated my own response, you're kind of like, you just want to share it. And that's not, you don't learn anything from other people when you're in that mindset. But I think extroverts and introverts can learn to be better at that. So really trying to, listen to something through someone else's well, lens is not the right word, but from someone else's perspective.
Alan, would you say it's important to learn how to pause and accept silence at times?
Yeah, well, that's just generally if you don't want to ruin relationships, and there's conflict involved, which there always will be if you're discussing anything meaningful to begin with. You know, don't say the first thing that comes to mind. You know, actually take that breath, or sometimes it's worth just kind of, you know, allowing yourself to think about it for a day, and then or an hour or whatever it is, and then come back to it, because otherwise you're going to react with your emotional mind instead of your rational mind, and you need to have a mix of both if you want to actually move the conversation forward.
Okay. We have 14 minutes left, and I have two more from Molood, but I'm going to ask this question that again came in from one of the membership. So for Molood, but again, everybody feel free to chime in. I'm fortunate to have a flexible work environment, and I'm typically in the office 3 days per week. I work closely with the manufacturing team in our organization, so it's a requirement. That said, I thrive when I have face-to-face interactions and struggle with remote only for a number of reasons. I'm encouraged to see the emphasis on more inclusion of remote workers, but fear we are swinging too far in this direction. What is your sense of the right balance for those who desire to continue a portion of work in person?
I am pro that, particularly related to the previous conversation, because my understanding of introversion and extroversion is quite different from what is being debated here, which is also why I've been very quiet in contributing to this particular topic. So my interpretation of that is introversion and extroversion is not necessarily about how people communicate, but rather how they gain their energy. So with that definition, I am 100% introvert. I need to be alone in a quiet area to recharge and gain energy. However, as you can see, I'm pretty outgoing. I can easily connect to people. I can easily start a conversation with a stranger, and that is not a challenge. But this is a communication style. And I think people have different communication styles, and there are certain people who are extroverted. They need that physical togetherness with people to gain energy. But in terms of communication style, there is both are dependent on real-time conversations that I talked about in my talk, and our lack of skills in effective asynchronous communication. So as long as we haven't fixed the operations, the processes in the organization to communicate effectively, asynchronously, we are going to need to meet each other in real time, because our completely remote work is not actually helping us to communicate well with each other. There's misunderstandings, there's missed deadlines, there's all sorts of problems that can possibly happen, right? So for people who are especially in manufacturing or hands-on work, how can you do that remotely? You need to go and be, on the field in the factory. You can't do that remotely. Remote work is about knowledge work, and we're talking about it because there is a fundamental change that is happening in the world where automation, robotics, AI, they're replacing a lot of the jobs that used to be done by hand. They're replacing a lot of the jobs that, unfortunately, were done by humans before. So yes, we're going to have a lot of people whose skills are going to be outdated because of this replacement. But remote work is about knowledge work, which means that people who want to be part of this future, not only do they need to learn how to communicate effectively remotely, those in the leadership positions need to create processes that support asynchronous and effective. I emphasize on effective because I've seen so many bad ones in place. And thirdly, we all need to create that possibility for every individual to be able to express themselves. So we're upgrading our consciousness, we're upgrading our skill sets, but we're still humans. And we have a couple of thousand years old genome in our bodies that still requires us to feel each other's presence and to be together. So yeah, I would definitely say we're going to need it. We're forever going to need it. This is not going away, which is also why I'm a little skeptic about the way that I see some companies are entering this future by recreating the environments that we had in the office, but making it virtual, which is not really working because we're missing that element of humanity in it.
Other comments from the panel?
Well, just that we've come, I do agree with pretty much everything you've said there. But I would say we've come a long way in terms of simulating the in-person connection. And so whether we've reached the limit of that or not is still to be seen. Like I come from an engineering background, and the company I used to work for, like I'm still involved with in some ways. And you just, when you want to have innovation in a virtual environment, it's very difficult to have that, what would I say, spontaneous conversation that you have when you're going to get a coffee or you're at the water cooler and you kind of just bounce an idea off someone and they say, yeah, no, I never thought of that. And then you kind of feed off their idea as well. And for that reason, that company's basically going all back to in person, because they notice that they just are finding it very difficult to have that same kind of innovation in a virtual environment where everything's kind of scheduled out and I don't know, maybe some of these things like we're talking about the Chatterfall and we'll be able to replace that. But so far I can say that company has not found it to be a replacement.
I'd like to quote a guy named Andy Hall over here. He says, if the biggest problem in your organization is that people cannot solve problems over a water cooler conversation, you have way bigger problems than that.
Well, maybe there's truth to that, but a lot of the innovative ideas that, like, because we're trying to solve complex problems, and actually some of the complex problems I would solve like in my sleep, like going to sleep. Like it's not particularly clear where you finally get the
I find walking away, I get more creative when I'm really trying to knuckle down or you're having conversations. Just walk away, and all of a sudden, all these ideas pop into your head.
Yeah, and so I guess he's kind of saying that that's not really. You're better to have it all process driven, and so it's like more purposeful on finding solutions. But I don't know. There's something in the human mind that doesn't jive well with that. It's like you can't be under the pressure, and so you need to be. You almost need something that's not work related to trigger that the creative part of your mind.
Sorry, that actually leads into the last question, so I will get all the questions in. So again, from Molood, but again, everybody else chime in, because I think this is probably for everybody. What, in your opinion, is the evolution of remote platforms, i.e. the metaverse? It'd be helpful to have a strategy behind future tools and capabilities that do not yet exist. So what else is going to be coming here? So I'll throw that out to Molood first, but everybody else chime in. And this will be our final question.
I cannot wait to see people actually innovate in this space. What I see right now is replication of our physical world onto the metaverse. I actually went to a digital photo exhibition this past weekend, and it was beautiful, but it was literally buildings. You would enter the buildings, there would be rooms, and you would see the pictures. I want to see people assume that this is not how we interact with the environment, that we don't necessarily need buildings or rooms, that it can be completely different. Like I am so waiting for the engineers and the designers who come together and can think outside the box on this. Like I remember when Instagram came, for example, or when, let's say, Spotify came. Spotify was sort of like a replica of other products that existed, but let's assume that they actually innovated this service. We were all thinking in CDs and DVDs, and we already thought that we were so much more advanced than cassettes, right? But then this whole idea comes where you can have as many songs as you want, whenever you want. And that was phenomenal. And I remember, like, I never had an iPod, and I was still like, saving money to buy an iPod, and Spotify comes around, and I'm like, okay, this is the future. But that's the kind of innovation that I'd like to see in this space, where people think completely differently than what we have experienced before in how we interact with each other. I don't know where we're going, how it would look like, but I certainly don't want to see any more platform that would gather people in their VR goggles around a Scrum board. moving
Yeah, I've never
pieces.
figured out the VR goggle thing. I still don't get that. That's a good point. So, other comments?
Oh, I think I mentioned that in our talk a while back with the chapters that ever since the pandemic started, I made a lot of predictions. They're all wrong. So if I'll give a prediction, just go the opposite of what I'm saying.
Oh, Larry David. Okay, go ahead, Larry.
Please give us a prediction.
No clue. I think it's so hard with so many things that are happening. Outside these interaction models, who knows? Yeah, I totally see what Molood is saying. We are been kind of replicating for the last 20 years for many reasons. What we've noticed, and we really haven't as humans rethought. Even if I look at a Tesla, it's just like it's a car, right? Powered by electricity, but it still has the car structure, right? So maybe that's our physical kind of limitations. Has nothing to do with our brains, or such. Just like the physical limits of the environment we operate in, and it's just hard for us to accept that.
You don't believe in transporters? Come on. Just reading about somebody got transported holographically up to the space station in the news feed. Come on, think outside the box.
It reminded me of a series that I watched a couple years ago, Altered Carbon, which describes like a completely new way of how the future could look like. And that was very outside the box for me. Like when I saw that, I was like, oh, I've never thought of it this way.
But I think you're onto something there with the replication point. That is an excellent point. Is it? I think we might be at a point where you're in the late 90s again, where it's going on right now and you don't know it. So the next Amazon or in the 80s or the 70s and 80s, the next Apple and Microsoft are out there, but you don't know what it is. But I mean, one we have here is the electric airplane. Again, it's a replication, but they are putting electric into it. And actually they have one of their offices right here in Gould, which is kind of interesting. That's probably more replication of, okay, I got to fly without carbon. How else could you get there? And then you have Elon Musk with the Boring project. Yeah, he's going to shoot you down a tube and get you in LA in 15 minutes. That's creative.
Yeah.
Elon is a little busy with Twitter right now. You've seen that in the news. But I'll throw a prediction out there. My prediction and the whole symposium has been around the changing definition of work. And my prediction is that the future of work is on demand, as we see a rise in digital platforms, as we see more professionals migrating from traditional employment into independent consulting and contracting. The future of work will be such that an organization will have a need now at, it's 10 o'clock my time, 10 a.m. Pacific time, and they will be able to engage with a potential prospect and hire someone same day. That's the future of work, and that's what we need, especially looking at technology and how quickly it is evolving and how competitive the landscape is. And that's what Talent Cheetah is also hoping for, in that we are a digital platform meant to provide on-demand 1099 consultants. So that is part of why I state that. But I truly believe that this is going to liberate the worker shortage and some of the labor issues that we have here in America.
And Rebecca, hasn't the talent platform, haven't talent platforms and the use of talent platforms increased dramatically over the past 2 years?
Yes, but I think to Malood's point, there's still the challenge with hiring organizations wanting to continue business as usual. And so we're a talent platform, but I still have hiring organizations ask, hey, can you send me the resume? Can you set up the interview for me, right? The goal of our platform is that it's self-service and the organization can do this in real time on their own. But because we're so accustomed to working with a staffing agency or a third party to help us in this area and getting resumes and the very slow process of talent acquisition, that's where I think the biggest barrier is for digital platforms, is that it's a complete change to business as usual. and that challenges us. Change is not always comfortable.
Okay, with that, I'm sorry, but I could do this all day. But we've run out of time. Thanks to our esteemed panel here. Great input from all of you. Great conversation. So we got Michael Neer, Rebecca Medina, Alan Mallory, Laura Burford, Molood Ceccarelli, and Michael de la Maza. Excellent session, folks. Taken away a lot from this personally and from all their presentations personally. So more than grateful to all of you for participating, doing the panel session, and sharing your wisdom with our section here. So this is all going to be recorded. This all has been recorded. I got it right. And I will share it with everyone involved in the symposium, including all the speakers. So, because there's a lot, I think, to unpack in a lot of the conversations that went on here, plus all the other presentations as well. So, again, I'd like to thank everyone today for their insight. And also, before I close, I don't think any of them are on the call today, but I do want to thank my collaborators at PMICV. You see me as the face of PMICV and as the program's VP, but I couldn't have done this without the help from Patty Shirk, who unfortunately couldn't make it today. She's been there to back me up on a lot of issues and a lot of help, especially with this new platform. Jason, our esteemed president of PMICV, who took over he gave me an evening off doing the moderation activities for Mr. Neer right there. And two others, Neil, who is our VP of marketing, he came up with that really cool graphic that I've been sharing throughout the symposium. I couldn't do anything like that. So he's an ace at that and many, many other things. And past president of the chapter as well. And also someone you haven't seen or heard from, but Lauren, who is our treasurer. All five of the presenters know who Lauren is. So she's processing all the bills and making sure everybody gets paid. We don't pay in advance, but we already pay them. So again, it was a big team effort. So with that, thank you. And I look forward to talking with everybody here soon again. This is all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Great
Brian.
session.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.